not Pastor Dennis, as you can tell. I'm not as good looking as him. I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Garrett Roy, and I've been a chiropractor for 31 years. I'm going to go a little bit more into that in just a minute. But what we're going to do is I'm going to give a little bit of my testimony first. And then after the testimony, there's a couple things for those of you that are advanced in this, can maybe glean from a couple points. Because when you do the 60-day challenge and you live in the lifestyle, what do we do after that? You know, there's a couple things that we can do that we're able to avert unnecessary tribulations. And I really love that when I heard Pastor Dennis say that years ago, because you know the Bible says we will have tribulations. Well, how do you decipher what's a tribulation you're supposed to have and which ones did you cause? And so, and I think most of us cause a lot of our own tribulations. Okay, so I've been a chiropractic physician for 31 years now. I was in the military prior to that for about 6 years in the Air Force. And prior to that, I went to the Central Piedmont Community College here in Charlotte after high school. And I grew up somewhat in Kannapolis, North Carolina. I say I grew up there. It's just my stability of my lifetime was pretty much there, which was about 4 or 5 years. But before that, I was all over the world. One thing I want to, a point I want to get across, when people come into this church or even other churches, you just look at these people going, they're all hunky-dory. You know, they got it. They've made it. They've arrived. And when the people walk in the church, all they're doing is seeing us on our victory laps. They don't know what we went through. And they're going through it. So as they come in, and you know, I'm guilty of this too, you walk into the church and go, oh, these people got it made. And then find out, oh, they had worse things, they went through worse things than I did. And so when we are approaching these things, what we want to do is just make sure we have a humble heart. And when you're doing that, you always want to be able to stay that way. And you don't. It's a work in progress when you're doing that, because sometimes you'll get pride. You're living out your wounds, and your wounds will cause you to. It'll drive you to do things, and I'll go over that in a little bit. I do want to give a disclaimer, and if I happen to talk in my testimony about something that happened with a particular wife, I will not give any names, but I've had 3 wives, so you're not going to be able to figure out who it was, because I'm not going to tell you. And that used to be embarrassing, but there's no wounds now there. I have memory, but no pain. That's the key to living this lifestyle. Full stature approach is living life, having all those traumas, but no pain in the memory. The pain is gone. The emotional pain and the mental and physical pain. And then sometimes ailments will go away. Sometimes your physical ailments can too. Just disappear. So I'm going to start way back when, based on these couple things I don't remember, and you're going to be like, well then how'd you go through these? Well, I did have to go through these. My mom had me in 1962 in March, and she was 16, so that was not a good thing for a girl to be pregnant at 16 in 1962. And my biological father at that time, while she was pregnant, pushed her off the porch at our house to try to kill me, because I was on the inside. Then later on, he came to the house. Mom survived, and I survived, obviously. He came to the house and threatened. He had a gun, and he was sitting on the side of his truck with his shotgun like that, and he threatened to kill us all. And obviously that didn't happen. But I think it's Dr. Bruce Lipton said that you start developing your personality in the third trimester in utero. So you hear things. That's correct. You hear these things. So as a child in utero, you hear the arguments, you hear the discord, you hear the praise and worship, you hear the love between people, you're hearing everything. So those things can start entering in you at that time. Then the first thing that my spirit probably heard was when I was 3 to 4 weeks old, was I heard my biological father said, "I don't want that baby." Well, I didn't know that, but as an infant who had just been born, just recently, you hear things like that. So fast forward a little bit, and some of these things, they're really funny about them now. But going through them, they were traumatic as a child. So when I was around 4 or 5 years old, my mother divorced my biological father shortly after all those incidences. Well, then she married a guy in the Army when I was around 4 or 5, just kindergarten age. And I remember this so well, and what I'm getting ready to explain is a perceived rejection. It was just as powerful as any rejection I'd ever had, but this one was perceived. My mother didn't reject me, but I perceived it as rejection. So I'm watching her and her new husband come down the aisle in the church, and we're all throwing the rice and stuff. And then when they're getting ready to get in their little 65-and-a-half-year Mustang, I think it was 65-and-a-half-year Mustang, she bends down to me and she goes, "Now we're going on our honeymoon." And I said, "Okay, where are we going?" And she said, "Well, no, you're going to stay with Nana and Pawpaw." And I was hurt. She didn't know that. She didn't reject me. Oh, but I was, because I had never been without her. I'm 4 or 5 years old. I had not been without her or my grandmother and grandfather. So I was living with them. So that's where a perceived rejection started. And they are just as powerful as all these others. I remember one other one, and I remember feeling this rejection. I was standing in a crib, and they put me to bed in daylight hours. And I don't know what for, but I thought, it's not dark. I'm not supposed to be in the bed. So I took my little glass bottle of milk, and I threw it all the way across the wall, and I hit the wall, and it shattered. And then it dawned on me after that, I got nothing else to drink tonight. And so that's living out your wounds early in life. In the first and second grade, so my mom married the guy in the Army. In the first and second grade, we moved to Germany. And there was a lot of experiences there. And out of protection for me, because they were having lots of fights and arguments, she would, I thought, punish me. "Garrett, go to your room." And I'm like, "I didn't do anything. Go to your room now." And of course, I'd go to my room, and then I'd play marbles or play with my Army men and things like that. And I didn't realize, till years and years and years later, that was for my protection, because there was lots of things happening in the kitchen and the living room that I didn't need to hear, and I didn't need to be in the way. So that was protection, from my mother, trying to make sure that her son was protected while she dealt with the situation as best that she knew how. Because remember, she can only deal with what she had based on her past. This is one of the first times, and I remember, and all these things were drop downs. These are drop downs that I've had to do that the Lord has brought up. And I remember one time fear coming in. So we lived in Hanau, Germany, which is a town about 22 kilometers from Frankfurt, Germany. And she was pregnant with my sister, and we had to go to an Air Force base to go to an OBGYN. So we're driving back to Hanau, and I think we were on the Autobahn or something. And we're listening to Armed Forces radio and television. And I heard, this is 68, 69, and I heard Armed Forces radio and television newscaster say, "We just bombed Hanoi, Vietnam, and it's been carpet bombed and all this other stuff like that." I didn't hear Hanoi. I heard Hanau. I was a little child. Of course, I'm standing up in the seat. Remember, Mom's seatbelt was this. You know, that's how I was going to Hanau, Germany, and when Mom's seatbelt was her hand like this. And I just started crying. She goes, "What are you crying?" "They bombed Hanau. They bombed our home. Oh, no." And then it dawned on her that I was listening to the radio. And she goes, "No, that's Hanoi, Vietnam they bombed. We live in Hanau." So I was crying, and I started sniffling, and I was like, okay, I'm okay. So we get there. We get to Hanau. We're coming onto the Army base, and I'm looking. All the tanks are still sitting in a row at an angle where they were when we left. And my little school's over here, and it's not up in smoke. And so everything, I said, okay. But I remember that fear. And that was one of drop downs later on that the Lord had to bring up a little bit later. Now, prior to that, and I think some of you already know this, I know the Zoom class knows this when we do this. We went to Kmart one day and I stole a 9-volt battery, and it was all good. Nobody knew about it until the little boy, about 4 or 5 years old, came out on me and decided to take that little 9-volt battery and test it on my tongue. I'd seen people do that before to see if it works or not. Well, I put that little 9-volt battery on my tongue, and you know how a dog sprays its territory? Well, after I put that on my tongue, I did that all the way to the bathroom because it affected my little bladder. And so I was having some issues. That's when they found out I stole the battery. It's because there's all this ruckus, and I'm running to the bathroom, and there's all over the floor going to the bathroom. And so in that instance, there was shame because once they said, "Where did you get this?" I knew at that moment that I did something wrong. And so we had to go to Kmart, and I had to personally apologize to the manager for stealing that 9-volt battery. And I have no idea what this guy looks like. All I saw was his shoes. I never looked up or anything like that. I could not. It was just "I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to." And that was it. That's when shame came in, you know. But I brought that tribulation on myself. So those are some of the ones that, and there's fear. So these wounds they're getting in little by little. This is how the enemy is working, and they're coming in me, and they're building, and I'm living out life like this. So we've had the rejection, we've had fear, and we've had shame. You see what the enemy's trying to do? And then tried to kill me before I was even born. So then, right before Mom finally, basically for our protection, Mom and her husband at the time, he was a Vietnam veteran, and he had lots of anger, lots and lots of anger, and the counselor told my mom, said, "I've never seen a man have so much hatred in his life, in his practice." And so they were getting a divorce, but before they got a divorce, I didn't know all the bad stuff about him. He was an alcoholic, and I remembered times where I just had to go to my room again because there was something going on, and I was being protected. But there were different times before the divorce. He got orders to go to Korea. Well, we're living in Columbus, Georgia at Fort Benning, and so we have to move off base. Well, he's in Korea, so this is my daddy. It's the only dad that I knew. He's in Korea, and so I got his picture by my bed, and I'm crying every night because I want him to come home because, I lived in Germany for a couple of years. I was aware of Vietnam. Now he's in Korea, and so the next time I saw him was when they were signing divorce papers. And all I really saw of him was his boots. It was just like when I was in Kmart apologizing and to the manager, all I saw was my dad's boots, and I knew that was going to be the last time that I saw them. So now there is, is it my fault? There's a lot of things that start to come in. Okay, now fast forwarding, by the time I was in the 8th grade, we moved around a lot. I was in my 13th elementary school, so my educational background was terrible, especially in English and math. Geography, I lived in 2 different continents, so I pretty much had that down. And, and I could make friends easy. I didn't have a problem because if you're a military brat, you just learn how to make friends because you're going to move around a lot. But it started coming to relationships, and that started to be a different issue. So I'm in high school now, and you know how you have your first puppy love, sweetheart, and we dated, I don't know how long, it was a sophomore year in high school, and she broke up with me, and I was just like, I didn't know why, and so I talked to my best friend, and he goes, do you know why she broke up with you? And I said, no. He goes, because you wouldn't have sex with her. And I'm like, that destroyed me, because I'm like, well, I didn't think we were supposed to. And but guess what? I made a vow at that point, that's never going to happen again. So now the goal is to have sex on the dates, not to be, grow up in the era of, you're not supposed to have, sex before marriage and all that. So now I'm living out, but I had all these relationship destroyers built in me in the past with rejection and fear. And so none of my relationships, ever really worked out. And they were just typical ones coming after you. And so you're living out your wounds, and you're living them terribly, because if you remember, things in your past, as you went through drop downs, you saw, oh my goodness, I need to get rid of that. I could have made better decisions back then. So I get to my next year in high school, and the devil tries to take me out again. I get diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and stage 1. They gave me 15 years to live, and they said that we've got it in the first stage, and we'll set you up for the first chemo and radiation. This was at Duke University, and we'll set you up for the first class in the next couple months. And so my mom says, I appreciate you, I understand, but there is a higher authority, and I'm going to trust in that higher authority. And I remember Dr. Moore putting his arm around my mom saying, now, Miss Roy, we understand you have your motherly love for your son, but he does have Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so we came back home, and we were in the process. We had left that particular denomination a little bit later. So my mom read in the book of James, if you call the elders of the church, they shall anoint you with oil, lay hands on you, and you shall recover. Well, they couldn't find anybody in our church that would come out to the house and do that, because they didn't, I don't know why they wouldn't do it. This particular denomination didn't really believe that. They read it, but they didn't believe it. And so she looked around, and she finally found 2 men that would come out to the house. So they called me out of track practice, come to the house. It wasn't too far away from the school. They put me in a chair. They prayed for me. They slapped a bunch of oil on my head, and I said, so I'm healed? And I was never taught that I couldn't be healed. And they said, yes, according to the Word of God. They wouldn't admit it, but it said, according to the Word of God, what we just prayed, you're healed. And I said, okay, well, I got to get back to track practice. And I did. And so I went back, and the Lord just reminded me of this, and I think I talked about this on a Tuesday night several months ago. In that, I'm not even going to call it a battle for cancer, because I never really had any symptoms other than the diagnostic stuff and everything that they said. But while I was going through cancer and getting ready to go into the chemo and radiation, I broke the high school 220-yard dash record that was set by a guy who went to play pro football after that. So in the middle of cancer, I set a high school track record. And I'm like, oh, go God, that's pretty good, because of the testimony that I have after that. So because of all those things building up, my grades were not good enough in high school to go to a 4-year university. I got turned down by every college. So I went to Central Piedmont, and thank goodness for that, because they could pick you up where you're at academically and take you where you need to go, and it was really, really good. So in that process, before I went into the military, we had left this particular denomination because we didn't see any power. We didn't see God moving. But we did see power in the New Age movement. So in the New Age movement, I did numerology, I did astral projection, did tarot cards, we did all kinds of different things that just really, because I was looking for God, but I couldn't find it in the religion, particular denomination that I was in, because, but I grew up in that denomination and they gave me a basics, or a foundation of Christianity. But going through all those different things, and anybody who's listening to this and they're thinking about those New Age things, they do not do it. Don't do it. Especially astral projection. It is as evil as you can get. I don't care if the military is experimenting with it and they do remote viewing and things like that. You are dealing with demons right up, and you are opening yourself up to it. Don't even go down that path, because if you do get any kind of power, it's going to be limited and they're going to require your soul. So don't deal with astral projection and remote viewing and things like that. So then I go into the military, and then there's a lot of drop downs over the time that I had to deal with this. Because of things I went through in the military. Now, I wasn't in wartime, but as law enforcement and a cop with a police dog, there is no hunky-dory time in the military. You're always dealing with bad things. And so there was an instance that was really tough for me. My police dog had to be put down, and my supervisor was just a real nutcase. I'm just going to say it nicely. And when your police dog has to be put down in the military, this is back in the 80s, they don't do it this way now. You don't go take your dog to the vet to be put down. Another handler will take your dog to the vet because they know the close bond that you have with your dog. And this particular dog had saved my life twice. And and I'd slept with him in the kennels some night, after some of these instances. And but my supervisor says, no, you're going to have to go take the dog to the vet yourself. And well, I said, okay, this is going to be tough. But I didn't realize how tough it was going to be. So when I get there, the veterinarian says, he saw the rapport between me and the dog, and he goes, are you the handler? And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, you're not supposed to be here. And I said, well, supervisor said that was it. There's 2 bomb dog handlers on this base, and only one can leave at a time. And he said, okay, you're aware that we have to cut the head off and cut the hips off and send them to Washington. And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, you just stay out here in the reception area. I'll go do this. So he told me that. So I'm sitting there in the chair, and I'm crying. Now, I was crying a little bit on this 4-hour trip. Well, the vet does what he does, brings me back the dog in a bag, and of course it has an awful smell to it. So I'm driving 4 hours back to this air base from that air base, and so you can imagine the trauma that went through there. Lots of headaches started then. All kinds of different things started cascading downhill. I hadn't become a Christian at that point, not yet. But there was a lot. Sometime before that, when I was in the Philippines, I was shot at. I had to forgive those supervisors for that because they didn't believe me. And I was out in the field protecting these F-15s in an alert barn. And the Philippine Air Force, which is supposed to be on our side, was shooting at me to keep me down because they were watching some Filipinos steal some things, and they were guarding them so that they could do it. And I called it in, and they said, we don't hear anything. Just, go back to your duties, Kilo 3, which is my call sign on that particular day. And so I walk around to the alert barn, and I see a great big old gaping hole where they had tried to steal the Sidewinder missiles off of the F-15s. And I called the control, and they said, I said, Kilo 3 to control, and they said, what is it, Kilo 3? I mean, just totally unprofessional. I said, what is it, Kilo 3? And I said, there's a 3 foot by 4 foot gaping hole with 2 boxes that's supposed to have Sidewinder missiles in them right here. And next thing I know, I could see the blue lights from all the way down at the other end of the flight line, and there was like 3 or 4, the flight chief, the lieutenant over the shift, and everybody was coming that way. And I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be something else, because it's on my shift and it's got me. They all get there, and lo and behold, they look. The lieutenant says, what happened? I said, I tried to call this in about an hour ago, and I was being shot at. And then I walk around here and I find this. And then he goes, Airman Roy, we'll take care of it from here. And I'm like, what do you mean? I did not have to do any paperwork at all. There was so much stuff that they had to backtrack and cover their tracks, because I called it in and they disregarded it. So I never had to do one jot or tittle in paperwork. They took care of everything. Well, good for them. But in that process, being in law enforcement, especially in the military, you see a lot of dead people. You see different things. You see accidents, all kinds of different things. And so as a result of that, years later, I qualified for PTSD from the military, from the VA. So there was enough stuff that happened back then, and that I was able to qualify and had the military diagnosis of PTSD. One of the last things that happened in the military, because of all those things that happen, and you have to be a professional on the scene of the crime or the death scene, I had developed the ability to not cry, because I had to hide behind my badge and be there and do my job. And that's when I changed bases and went to a new base. It's kind of like starting all over again. That's when I started going to a chaplain, and I went to the chaplain because of that, because I started saying, this is not me. I can't cry, even if I want to. And this was a Presbyterian chaplain. And so we're talking, and he said, I noticed that you pray a lot. You say you pray a lot. And I said, yeah. He goes, have you ever thought about listening after you pray? And I went, no. It never even entered my mind to listen. And he goes, well, why don't we listen? So that's when I got saved. He just sat there and he said, Father God, Garrett just wants to hear you right now. And as soon as he finished saying that, immediately, I just felt this warm honey come down the back of my head, all the way down to my spine. And I started boo-hooing. I started just crying, and the chaplain was just handing me Kleenexes and giving me more. And he goes, are you okay? Are you okay? And I said, you don't understand. I haven't been able to cry for 3 years. And so that was my salvation at that point. And I didn't know any better. I was just like, okay, what do I do now? And I found a Spirit-filled church, got Spirit-filled within about a month after that. Baptized. This was in Minot, North Dakota, so I got baptized in a pool at the YMCA because it's too cold outside pretty much most of the year in Minot, North Dakota. So now I was a Christian. There was some hard things. So if some of you have children, you can identify with this. I have one son at this particular time, and this was the birth of Spencer, Joseph Spencer. And the first birth we had with Garrison, we tried to have a home birth and we couldn't because he was breech. And but we could have, but the midwife just didn't feel comfortable. So now we're having a home birth with Spencer. We're doing everything right. I'm a chiropractor. You know, we're trying to do things naturally. We're eating right. We're going to church. The kids, I'm growing them up in the Lord. And Spencer's born, and he has a birth defect. And he couldn't have a bowel movement, and he had to have 3 surgeries the first part of his life the first surgery was to save his life because he couldn't poop. So he had to have a surgery and have a colostomy put right here so that he could go to the bathroom. Then they created an anus for him in the second surgery. In the last surgery, they took off the bag and reconnected the colon, and he was able to do that. But I was doing everything that I knew possible right to do. I was eating right. We got the family in church. And then all of a sudden, I get hit with this, your son has a birth defect. And I'm like, how's that possible? So there's where I knew not to blame God, but I did keep asking why. Why God? Why God? Why? So that was a blame. I was blaming him in instance because I didn't, and I knew health and healing. He wanted us and to be healthy. But it was really, really difficult at that time because I did not understand. And it was a point to where when you're doing everything right, and a lot of you out there are like this too. Not everybody has terrible backgrounds. I was doing everything right. But what I wasn't doing right is I didn't have an open heart to God the whole time. I was still living out my wounds. My wounds were driving me to do certain things in my life. And so it took, I never got over that for a long time. And until really started getting into the full stature approach in dealing with my past and the emotional hurts. And that's when I was able to finally deal with Spencer's birth defect, because it's like, my goodness, I'm doing everything right. So if you're a young family and you're doing everything right and you get hit with something like that, you just got to trust God. That's all there is to it. And you got to look up the scriptures on it, just trusting God. That's the bottom line. It just sounds cold and simple, but it really is. You've got to get yourself, crawl up in God's lap and just let him have your heart. Because everybody's going to go through certain things in life, and different people have different hurts. So eventually, there was a divorce in that marriage. And this was another instance where you're going through, you're married for a good long time, and then all of a sudden you find out your spouse has a boyfriend, and you didn't know how long. So now you're devastated again. And so you hadn't even gotten over the child's birth defect, which was several years back. Now you have a wife of a lot of years, and it's like, so that just took me down even further down the road. But I kept at least asking God, I was blaming him, but at least I stayed there. I stayed with him to my own best ability. In the divorce proceeding over the next couple of years, it was absolutely terrible. I had 4 different lawyers and 3 different judges and probably 8 or 9 different court appearances because it was just a nasty divorce. And every time I lost. And I was believing God because I wanted to get the children out of an adulterous relationship and live with me. Well, what I didn't know is men really just don't have a lot of rights in Arkansas. And so that was really devastating to me, but I was staying in church and I was trusting God, but I didn't know. I was still living out my wounds. I still had not, if I had had my wounds dealt with long before, I may have been able to deal with these things in a lot better mode. Does that make sense? These things would have not been so deep. So there was one last chance to be able to get, to at least get Spencer. Spencer developed autism out of one of those surgeries because he didn't come out of the surgery. The second one, they had to put a shot of caffeine in his heart because the anesthesia was, he couldn't come out of the anesthesia. And in that, there was a little bit of oxygen loss to the brain, and he developed autism. But he's high-functioning autism, and he's been here. Y'all seen him. He comes in the summertime sometimes. So there was an instance there where, okay, I'm finally going to at least be able to get him under my wings and start teaching him, get him out of this kind of situation and back into a godly situation. And that failed too. I won't go into any of the details, but everything failed. So after that divorce was final, I'm still bleeding on the inside. And within a year, I knew better, but I got married again because someone was saying all the right things. They were doing all the right stuff, and they're going to help me out. But I was still bleeding from the last divorce, and there was no reason why I should have went into this particular marriage other than I just thought it was the right thing. But that was living out my wounds. One of the things, when you're trying to make it right, I'm not going to tell you which marriage this is. Remember, you're not going to know which one it is. So I was going to a counselor in this particular marriage, and so we're going to counseling, and in this particular marriage, my wife at the time demanded a female counselor and one out of town because it was too embarrassing at church. I said, okay, we'll do that. And we went for a couple sessions, and then they stopped. They just stopped dead. And I started doing some research and found out that she had an affair with the counselor. And so I'm kind of like, okay, God, what's up with this? I'm just like, all I could do was just like, what's up? I didn't know how to handle things, but I was doing the best I could. There was a lot of stress and a lot of strife that was going on with that. And that was one thing that after 2 years of doing drop downs and living the lifestyle, God brought that situation up and said, I was on the interstate, getting ready to get on 85, coming south to come to work here in Fort Mill, and I'd already had my 3 drop downs early in the morning. I was done. I'm getting on the road. I'm getting on the ramp on 85, and the Lord brings that to my memory and says, you have not forgiven that counselor and that ex-wife. And I started crying. I had to pull over. I couldn't even get on 85 because I couldn't see because I was crying so much. And I said, oh, yeah, I got to deal with this right now. And so I did. I dealt with it, and then I was driving to work and things like that. And I think that was the one where I called Jason, and I said, why didn't God bring this up at 5:30 when I was doing my drop downs? He brought it up at 6:30 when I'm on the road, and I had to stop. And he said one of the things I'd never really thought about or heard before. He said, you weren't mature enough at 5:30. You were at 6:30 when you got on the road. In other words, something happened after those 3 drop downs. They were just simple, nothing spectacular. Something happened in that hour that was transforming my life to where I got mature enough spiritually where God could finally bring this up to me and go, you really haven't dealt with it. I thought I did. And so that was an eye-opener. And that one happened after, drop downs are just easy to do. This was years later. So God will do that with you. If you are willing and obedient, He will definitely meet you where you're at. So those are a lot of the drop downs were some of those situations. So let me tell you some of the tools that I thought I would give you. There's 3 tools that you learn here and you can get with Full Stature Ministries. And these tools are things that I've learned basically in counseling with Jason. And but I want to give you 2 scriptures to go with this. First one is Philippians 1:6. And I was looking through my notes from church since 2022, and this scripture is written down a lot. Y'all talk about it a lot. So here it is in the Amplified Classic Version. I am convinced and sure of this very thing, that He who began a good work in you will continue until the day of Jesus Christ. right up until the time of his return, developing and bringing into full completion in you. So God will do that, and that's, we're all still a work in progress. And that was Philippians 1:6. Then Isaiah 26, I think it's verse 3. This is the thing that is probably the foundation of Full Stature Ministries, and that is, perfect and absolute peace surrounds those whose imaginations are consumed with you. They confidently trust in you. And that is in the Passion Translation, Isaiah 26. So the three tools. The first one is going to be preferences. The next two is going to be like a combination of neutral and agenda. You develop your preferences. Is everybody good with me now? Everybody awake? Okay, because now we're going to get, we're finished with the hard stuff. Now here comes the easy stuff. Preferences are when you like things better than other things, and sometimes that's okay. You like a football team, a basketball team, whatever. But you have to be careful, because preferences can come because of soul ties in the past. And when that happens, now you're living out more wounds. What these tools are for, remember I said at the beginning, we're trying to deal with unnecessary tribulations. That's where we're at. So we've got tribulations in our life. Let's try to avert unnecessary ones by dealing with our preferences, being neutral, having an agenda, not having an agenda, and then a perennial prayer. So in preferences, we like things. But I'll tell you something that may be kind of cold, but you got to hear me out on this. God doesn't care about your preferences. Okay? He doesn't care, because they usually get in the way of his preferences for you. So I've had to learn, to start putting my preferences aside. And those are the things, that, and your preferences are basically this thing that you want. And you got to find out, why do I want these things? Is it because I got a soul tie attached to it? Is there a bitter root attached to it? But those are preferences. Now, neutral is one thing, is a very powerful thing that Jason taught me, and that's the ability to get neutral. And anytime you're having a hard time getting neutral, and what it is, neutrality is just basically, I'm okay if I don't get what I'm looking for in this particular situation. And God wants me to live like this. Or I'm okay on the other end of the pendulum. I'm okay if I get what I want. But they both have to be equally emotionally the same in you. You're okay with either one. Does that make sense? Neutral. Now, if you're having a hard time getting neutral, this may be a question you may need to ask God, ask the Lord. What is giving the devil permission to cause confusion in me right now in this? So you have to look, you may see if you have any open doors that you may have allowed the enemy to cause you to not get neutral. Sometimes getting neutral is easy, but in my experience, it's been some difficult ones to learn how to get neutral. Then there's agenda. Agenda, it'll drive you. And when it drives you, it's usually because there have a history in that agenda of soul ties or bitter roots or both. So those things are coming in. You see how the enemy works in your childhood and brings you all the way up? That's why God can redeem all this stuff. And, and I'm redeemed. I'm an okay person now. I'm not I made it through chiropractic school, 31 years of practice, and I'm an okay person, at least I think so. But you have to deal with your agendas, and because if you don't, who becomes God? You do. You are God. If you don't deal with your agenda, you are playing God in your own life. trust me, you don't want to be God. And you don't want to be God in your own life. As I heard someone say, how's that working out for you? That's what brought us all to Full Stature Ministries. And this is one thing that Jason and Gwen said in one of their, I think that they were up here teaching marriage. They said, you must not examine yourself apart from God, because you will get in the flesh. Your answers will be coming from your flesh, or they'll be coming from the enemy, which would be lies. So when you're examining yourself, being neutral, preferences, make sure that you're humble and you're like, and you got to be neutral with God and go, because there's been times where I'm like, oh, I know I need to drop down about this, but I really don't want to. You're going to have to get neutral about that too and say, I'm okay. I'm okay. I got to get neutral. Let's drop down. Okay, Lord, let's just commune. And when you get to that point to where you can actually do that, then you can actually grow spiritually, because you can't spiritually mature. This is one of the famous things that Pastor Dennis says. You can't spiritually mature beyond your emotional maturity. And one of the things, and this may be simple for y'all, it may be too simple for you, but it was huge for me. And Pastor Dennis says a lot of things sometimes when he's teaching, and it's just like, he just said it in passing, but I took it and I was like, oh, that is a life-changing phrase right there. And here's the phrase: that's not me. Whenever the enemy is attacking you, that's not me. And it works. You don't even have to use a scripture like Jesus did when he was talking with Satan, although that's the ideal thing to do, is to that's the only way to fight Satan is with the scriptures. But that's not me. So when things come upon you, that's fear, rejection, shame, all the hell flags, you say, that's not me. And that's not me is very, very, is very powerful. Has anybody not heard Pastor Dennis say that phrase before? It works. Sometimes you have to say it 3 times, because I think the enemy wants to make sure you're serious about it and you're just not parroting what, the devil says, well, I know Pastor Dennis, but do I know you? And that kind of comes from the book of Acts. And so you got him scared. You got him on the run, Pastor Dennis. Okay, and the last one is prevenient prayer. I don't know if it really makes a difference. I always did this after my drop downs. And prevenient prayer is releasing forgiveness in advance. There's 3 parts to it. And I just release forgiveness to whosoever comes across my path today. Of course, I drive a lot, so I'd say whoever comes across my lane. And I still have to do that because it's just crazy people out there. So you release forgiveness in this prevenient prayer. Then you release loving intercession to whosoever and everybody in your family and whatever. You release that loving intercession. And the third one, which is a key, you have to release all demands and expectations of people doing the things that you don't want them to do, and then not doing the things that you want them to do. That's prevenient prayer. That's number 3, which is releasing demands and expectations. But there is an expectation that tops off your expectation of other people, and that is your expectation of yourself. You can have issues because you are demanding and expecting too much out of yourself, and you'll work yourself to the bone. You'll become religious and you won't even know it. You'll break away from the special time, and you can immediately break away into religious activity instead of just staying down, staying into the mode. When you get up from your prayer time, you stay in that mode, and it takes time to get there. And these expectations, it'll go back to unmet needs in your past. Wounds, soul ties, bitter roots. So these expectations of people and of yourself can come from unmet needs. And we all have unmet needs from our past. Nobody's had a perfect life. And when you have these expectations and you have to deal with them, sometimes you may have to get neutral again. And there we go. You got to get neutral. You must manage your expectations by releasing them, or they will manage and control you. So you've got to release those expectations. Drop down into that secret place where the Lord is and ask, do I have any unhealthy expectations in me? And that's a humbling thing to try to do. Sometimes you can ask and not mean it, but you better, and you'll know it if you don't mean it. Sometimes you got to get down and go, okay, I really mean it this time, Lord. So the key is, this is very simple. This is going to seem like a contradiction, but it's not. The time frame that we're in right now in our lives, in political history, prophetic history, and everything that's going on, we don't need to be reading a lot of books. We've got to get simple and just go back to the simplicity of what Jesus was teaching. Okay? Now, but I have 3 books right here that I want you to take note of. And I want you to look at this. So this is the simple prayer. This is where you learn how to do the drop downs. Okay? These, when you look at this, the 60-day challenge, look at this as a manual. Okay, you get a manual for a washing machine or microwave, something you're putting together. The owner's manual tells you who the manufacturer is. That's God. Okay. The owner's manual tells you everything you need to know and some things you don't really care to know. But you can read the owner's manual. This is an owner's manual for Christians. And bitter roots and soul ties are amendments to this. So as you're going through the 60-day challenge, the first time, the second time, until you make it a lifestyle. So however many, I say the first time, second time. It took me 4 times of documenting 1, 2, 3 every morning, my 3 drop downs. Then finally, I didn't have to really document that much anymore. But the simple prayer is going to be the main manual to guide you for your future. And when you're reading, these go hand in hand with the simple prayer. I've always talked about that in the men's group, and it meant so much to me and helped me because I'm going through the prayers, but I'm getting some answers when I'm listening to the CDs or reading the books on soul ties and the CDs. You're going, oh, that's why I went through that. So they're definitely good amendments to the book, Simple Prayer. And when we have those things and we're reading them and we're going through them, you start maturing and you start growing. But the thing is, when you get to a certain point, you're like, and I remember reaching that point, I actually started taking the drop downs for granted. And the Lord dealt me with that and says, my son died for you. And you just did this little simple, because some drop downs are real simple. They're really not that difficult. It's like, oh, Lord brings it up and you do it. But he knew in my heart I was taking some of them for granted. So I repented, and it's like, I'm sorry, Lord. I've received forgiveness. And that was a big thing about Full Stature Ministries, is you receive these things. They're already bought for you. Salvation was bought for you. Healing, all your needs have already been bought and paid by Jesus on the cross. So all we have to do is just receive them. We don't have to beg and plead and borrow. We just have to receive them. And so let's just be simple in the days to come. All these people that are coming in with the multi-billion soul harvest, they just need the simplicity of Jesus, and we have it here. And so as we have this, let's just release it to other people when they start coming in. Yes, sir.
I want to make an observation that while I'm listening, discernment is easy for me. But what I love is the fact that everything he's talking about, there's no pain. That's sanctification in the biblical sense. Jesus takes the pain and the sorrow so that you can talk about it. That means it's a testimony, and that means there's an anointing on everything he's saying. And so I'm very proud of this young man.
Amen.
Thank you, sir.
Even though he's got a long ways to go to be as mature as me, but
Well, that's for sure. Yeah.
but he's getting it. But let that be a challenge. If you can't talk about something, and there's a lump in your throat or an ache in your gut, that area has not been separated unto God. Everything he said, and some of those things were not simple, were they? No, they weren't easy. But when you talk about it and there's no pain, no sorrow, who alone can do that but the Spirit of God and Jesus in him? I'm just very proud of him. Very good. Good job. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir. Well, I appreciate your ministry because y'all, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this beautiful woman, your wife, putting everything down on paper and CDs and all this, and being able to read that. And, so it's, I'm glad the Lord led me to this place because this is,